put in code Jesus' main message. And as Mark recorded Jesus in his rebuke and encouragement of the disciples in chapter 10, when the disciples were fighting about who would be put on a pedestal, who would be exalted. Jesus said this, and this has application across Jesus' mission and his desire for our mission. So, Mark chapter 10, verse 42 and following through 45, speaking directly to followers of the Messiah. You know that those in this world who are regarded as rulers lord it over those they rule, and their high officials exercise authority over them. And here's the turn: not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all, and whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. As we close out chapter 12 and move into chapter 13 tomorrow with what's called the Olivet Discourse, which is going to be an amazing text. I'm not quite sure. It is an amazing text. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle it yet as to the number of teaching sessions required to do it any sort of justice. But we're closing out here. Jesus has been in the temple answering challenges from the religious leaders and confirming his identity and confirming for the religious leaders their necessity to get rid of him. And this is sort of the, if you will, the tipping point today. And this is the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. But this conversation is not just for religious leaders. It is for everyone who enjoys being elevated and on a pedestal. And that's why I've titled this particular session Pedestals. We're in Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. And in this section, there are two distinct movements. And the first movement is a watch out. And that's from 38 through 40. And then there's a watch this. And both of these movements have to do with self elevation or a posture of trust. And the teaching will become clear as Jesus speaks in the temple with a large crowd, including these same religious leaders that he has been in this conflicting dialogue with, this combative environment. And just as a matter of review, Jesus has always in their place. Every religious leader and every segment of the religious leaders in their categories. In the Sanhedrin, the general category, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law, and even in one case, a governmental civil official was in this game of let's trap Jesus, but he would not be trapped. Interestingly, their desires to trap him for their own ability to prosecute him toward guilty and execution was not even necessary because he was going to complete his mission. And his mission in obedience to the Father was to allow himself. I give up my life and I take it up again. It is mine to give away again. And his mission is for our redemption, which necessitates his execution so that we can see the fruit of his mission, the outcome in his resurrection. So this is really in the temple setting in this throng that's listening, enjoying, being challenged by, wondering about Jesus and his teaching. This is the ultimate. This is the pinnacle of his conversations with the religious leaders, and as far as they're concerned, this is the tipping point. So here is the watch out. As he taught, huge crowd, including religious leaders, including teachers of the law, including all the representatives of God's authority in the nation. As he taught, Jesus said, I'm in verse 38, watch out. It's the Greek word is blepo, like check it out, discern, be aware, watch out, be on your guard, watch out for the teachers of the law. And they're in the crowd. And they are authorities. They are those rulers who are lording it over people. Watch out for the teachers of the law. And this is the pedestal that they built for themselves. They like to walk around in flowing robes, and these are robes that you can't work in. These are robes that are designed to draw attention and project power and prominence. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. So they enjoy this preeminence. They enjoy this power. They enjoy these here according to their building of their own pedestal. They like to walk around in flowing robes, be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues. Now, this is an interesting arrangement if you've never studied it, which you probably haven't. It's a bit of a little more depth. But in the synagogues, these important seats are, and we've seen these in churches too. It's where these men sit apart from everyone else, and in Judaism, in the synagogue in the temple, there's this place that is so close to the Torah, which is the revered instrument of God's message to humanity. The Torah being the five books of Moses in a large scroll, and so they're close to the source. They have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. So they enjoy their position in this pedestal. You see the post of this pedestal they built. And Jesus is drawing this to a conclusion about the outcome of a desire to build for yourself a pedestal. Verse 40, they devour, and this word devour means they consume to the utmost. They completely ingest everything of value from other people. And in this particular case, a widow who in ancient Near East is typically a woman without resources because she's lost her husband and she hasn't had a chance to gain for herself through a trade or a vocation any kind of consistency and hope and promise and provision. They devour widows' houses and for a show in pretense, and that's the word in the language, and for pretense. A pretense is something where I provide for you a billboard that I want you to see so that you'll think well of me. And for a pretense, make lengthy prayers. So I like this verse 40. I think it's Alistair Begg who said in this text, verse 40, these two opposing and identically sounding words. They pray, Prey, on widows and the helpless, and then they pray, Pray, in a lengthy show of their own self righteousness. They pray and they pray. And for a show, they make lengthy prayers. So just to let me review these. I worked hard at this, so I want to pass it along. Watch out for those who build pedestals for themselves. And this is where we need to examine ourselves as well. A pedestal of power, prominence, popularity, position, with an attitude of predation or to prey upon those I can consume from, and pretense. That shows me as a poser. So this is a poser's pedestal. Someone who desires for all the world to see how valuable and noble and powerful and honorable and through their popularity and through their consuming of resources, they've built for themselves this shell that's they've now convinced themselves is a solid platform for living. But Jesus says this is the outcome. So verse 40 needs to be in its entirety. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. And here's the summary of those building pedestals for themselves. These men will be punished most severely. So in the original statement in the language, this is an intensity of judgment based on the intensity of hypocrisy. This is a little bit scary for me because I'm someone who, as a vocational minister, uh, I can see myself here. I enjoy being popular. I enjoy people wanting to usher me into the places of honor. I enjoy walking and being recognized as Reverend. Uh, in Southern culture, it's preacher. No, I don't necessarily. I do have a name, but I can see myself in here. But if I can see myself in here in my particular circumstance, we can all see ourselves here when it comes to wanting to show the world worth and place ourselves on a pedestal. But for believers, remember Jesus is this the servant. And we just read from that great summary statement in Mark 10. Not so with you. And so this first movement is a watch out. And then in the second movement here, as we move just through the rest of this brief section from 41 to 44, we have a watch this. So if these religious leaders are the negative object lesson, the watch this, the person highlighted and elevated not by self but by Jesus, is the positive object lesson. So Jesus is still in the temple, and he sat down, verse 41, opposite the place where the offerings were put, and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. So if you've heard me teach on this section before, you know how much I love this section, especially if you know the arrangement and the construction of the temple treasury, because what is seen here is a broad array. The temple treasury is arranged. Hang on a second. I have to make an adjustment. I'll be right back. I'm back. So the temple treasury has 13. This is the place where people come and make their offerings to God. And there's 13 of these brass trumpets. They come out of a vault. The vault is secure inside the walls, but there are these receptacles with these narrow necks inside, and they come out, and they have this broad trumpet opening that looks kind of like a flower at the top, and it's made out of brass, and so it makes a lot of noise. And so what we see here is, as Jesus is watching, we see people coming in and the rich people throwing in large amounts. And I believe what Jesus is doing here is he's going from the pretense of the religious leaders to a recognition that sometimes when we trust in our riches, now I might be taking this a little too far. Jesus will clarify in a second, so stay with me. But what's happening here, I believe, is Jesus is making a connection between the religious leaders and their pretense and rich people and their pretense. And might I dare say, in the West, we're richer than any of these rich people. So it could be our pretense based on our trust in riches and the pedestal we desire from what riches can offer. So what happens here is these coins that are alloy metallic or metallic are being thrown into these brass receptacles and making a bunch of noise. And so from a pretense standpoint, you've heard me teach this before. It's like I walk up and I want everybody to know that I'm a person of means. And the way I do that is by making sure this trumpet, as metal hits metal, makes as much of a resonance as possible. So it's like, dun 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 dun, and the next person comes and like, I can top that, dun 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 dun. And so when all these people, remember it's Passover, so this is a continuation over the giving, and these rich people are putting in these large amounts. But here's the watch this. Jesus is going to call this person out over and above all the people that are putting in the symphonically resonant, volume intense offering. Verse 42. But a poor widow came. Remember the widows' houses that are devoured by the religious leaders? Mode of comparison. But a poor widow came and put in two very small copper coins. Now, these are two lepta or lepton in the plural. And so this is literally enough money to buy enough wheat for a single meal. That's probably about the value. A poor widow came and put in two very small copper coins, two lepta, worth only a few cents. And so this gets Jesus' attention. And he says, watch this. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. Well, wait a minute. I mean, I take the Bible literally. What is Jesus trying to say? He's trying to say that there is a deep connection between my own desire to create a pedestal for myself, or conversely, my deep posture of trust and reverence in God. This widow has put more into the treasury than all the others, and here's why. They gave out of their wealth, which the indicator here, the interpretive next move is that it didn't really cost them anything. I don't want to say it's chump change, but it's not something that they feel. It's not something that's sacrificial. It's not something that is a recklessness, which I think is a good word, and I'll talk about that again in a minute. Because indeed, this is a sacrificial recklessness that this widow showed uh, her devotion and trust in God. But these rich people gave out of what they didn't even notice or feel. I think this is important for us just to pause. And this is a financial understanding. It's not just financial, but it's at least, and I think because we're in the context of giving financially, we need to pause and consider our own heart of trust toward our riches, whether we are on a pedestal of false security based on our wealth, or we truly understand our posture of sacrificial recklessness because all of our provision and security is promised and provided by God. Truly, I tell you, this poor widow, I'm back to 43, has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth. They all gave out of their wealth. But she, now this is the second contrast in here. The first contrast is from the rich putting in large to a small widow putting in almost nothing. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. And so Jesus provides, so it's so important to catch this. Jesus provides the pedestal for this woman because of out of everything that's going on in this huge throng. And when he called his disciples to him, he probably had to point in the midst of all this going on because we probably see a frail, poorly dressed woman in the midst of all this other color and movement in the temple courts. And so Jesus himself provides the pedestal for this woman and lifts her up in her posture of trust. there's a lot to consider here. What pedestal are you on? Are you one who desires popularity, desires the provision that you've been given and that you've earned to be the billboard of of your identity? Are you someone who loves to be recognized and loves to be ushered into the first places and the highest places? Those attitudes seem to be counter to Jesus's lesson here about trust. And we can be sure that every pedestal that we create for ourselves, it will be cast down if we built a pedestal for ourselves, a look at me that's based on position and protection of that position, and a predatory mindset toward gathering this world's resources, and we consume from others to do so. And this is a tough evaluation. And some of us are so predisposed to being predators that we don't even realize it anymore, in the way we do our business, in the way we cut corners, in the way we sharpen edges of transactions, that we don't even realize it. And then I would offer, in that same false pedestal is a lack of sacrificial recklessness that shows our posture of trust in God. So this is what I've written. Any pedestal, every pedestal built by self for self will be cast down. So my counsel to myself first is to climb down and either resume or begin a posture of trust, climb down or be cast down. Do you see this right here? These men and women, by extension and application, these self pedestal builders, will be punished most severely. So this is Humpty Dumpty and his great fall. You know, the biblical text says in both the Hebrew text, or which we call the first covenant, or the Old Testament and the New Testament, that a posture of humility will certainly result in an outcome of God Himself providing you with a pedestal of His own making, which can never fall. Humble yourself before the Lord's mighty right hand, and in due time, He will lift you up. And as far as this particular text is concerned, it's dealing with finances most prominently. This woman has a sacrificial recklessness when it comes to her sufficiency in Christ, or her trust in God. So she's willing, because she understands that God has provided for her everything and will continue to. She's willing and even insistent. I mean, I'm just imagining a bit of what it takes for her to work her way through this crowd with people looking at her in her raggedy clothes, and maybe shuffling along with her head down. But any any need for popularity has been crucified, because she knows the true source of her security. And one thing we might miss here is even those two lepta, when put into the temple, actually provide needs for other people. So a portion of the temple tax, or the temple giving, was to take care of people who had less provision. And it's almost certainly the case that she who had the most provision uh, to lose, meaning Jesus said she gave all she had, She gave it all so that people who probably had more than her in the way we see need would be provided for. It's an amazing example of sacrificial recklessness. So when it comes to your generosity, and when I start thinking about my generosity and our family's ability to give, Sherry and I like to call to mind what C.S. Lewis said about amounts, because we get hung up in amounts a lot and percentages. And I think all of those are violations of sacrificial recklessness. Because it seems when we start doing these calculations, what's in the Bible, what's not in the Bible, grace, law, we want to to not be sacrificially reckless, but we want to make sure we're doing the minimum that God might say, okay, check. But in that desire to just do the minimum is probably some need to protect our own pedestal. C.S. Lewis said, "I'm not sure what to say about how much we should give. All I can say for sure is that it should be, must be more than we think we can afford to give." See, that is sacrificial recklessness. Posture of trust and humility that, when maintained, will be exalted by the Lord Himself. What better pedestal? You don't have to climb. The pedestals provided, the humble sacrificial recklessness and proof of trust in God results in His own lifting us up and placing us on a pedestal of His own making. Not so we can be boastful in ourselves, but we can continue now to boast in the Lord. He has provided everything we need. So, these two examples today. Watch out. Be careful about creating your own pedestal. Climb down or be cast down. And watch this, a beautiful example of sacrificial recklessness that will surely, and we see it in the text, Jesus Himself lifts her up. It will surely provide a pedestal of His making in His timing that can never be cast down. All right, chapter 13 tomorrow. I need you to pray about how to handle this properly. It's so rich. There's a million ways to go. And we could be here till Jesus returns, just in chapter 13.